Imagine you open your eyes, and instead of a soft mattress or a blanket, you feel the cold bite of damp earth beneath your skin. The smell is of smoke and wet fur. Your back aches because you've spent the night on a bed of rough hides stretched over twigs, and the fire that kept you warm a few hours ago has dwindled to a pile of pale ash. This is morning in the Stone Age, a place where the very act of waking up is already a battle for survival. Before we step further, let me ask you something gentle. Where are you listening from tonight? I always love to hear how far these stories travel. And while you're here, if this calm journey through history helps you drift off or makes your curiosity spark, consider tapping the like button or subscribing. It helps me keep uncovering the strangest, sleepiest corners of the past just for you. Now, back to the Stone Age dawn. The air is icy, and if you think you could just tough it out, remember this: you don't own clothes, at least not the kind you're used to. No soft cotton pajamas, no thick wool sweaters. What covers you is a patchwork of animal skins, stitched with sinew and bone needles. If you're lucky, those skins were dried and scraped well, so they don't smell too strongly of death. If you're unlucky, you're wrapped in half-tanned hide that still reeks, and the stench follows you everywhere. The sun is only just a faint smear of light on the horizon, but your day has already begun. There's no alarm clock, no breakfast waiting. Your alarm is the hunger in your belly, and your breakfast is whatever you can manage to find before the cold kills you. And it can. Stone Age mornings were not gentle. The Ice Age wasn't some distant idea. For many of our ancestors, it was the reality pressing against their skin every single day. Temperatures at night could plummet far below freezing. Imagine trying to survive that without a heated home, without a pantry full of food, and without even the certainty that you'd see the next sunrise. But let's make it even worse. You're not alone. Around you are the other members of your group. Family, perhaps, though the idea of family back then was more fluid. Clusters of 20, maybe 30 people at most, huddled together in a fragile camp. And survival isn't just about you. If the fire dies and you fail to rekindle it, everyone freezes. If no one goes out to hunt or forage, everyone starves. The burden of survival presses down on every single body equally, from children barely old enough to walk to elders who've seen too many winters. Now think about food. It isn't waiting in a cupboard. It isn't bought at a store. You don't even know if you'll eat today. Every single morning in the Stone Age began with the same question: where will we find enough to survive? Will it be berries clinging stubbornly to frost-bitten branches, roots clawed from the frozen soil, or perhaps, if luck shines on you, the meat of a hare or a deer? Though that means risking a hunt, and hunting is no glorious sport here. It's exhaustion, fear, and often failure. Your stone tools are sharp but fragile, your spears heavy and awkward. The prey is faster, stronger, and far better suited to the cold. If you fail, you go hungry. If you succeed, you still risk injury, and in this world a twisted ankle or a cut that festers is as good as a death sentence. The truth is, you wouldn't survive a day in the Stone Age because every morning was already a crisis. You would wake up not to comfort, not to certainty, but to desperation, to know that you're just one bad night away from never waking again. And even the strongest among them felt this fear. Survival wasn't a guarantee, it was a gamble, every single sunrise. Imagine waking up in the Stone Age. You've survived the freezing night, huddled against the bitter winds in a crude shelter made from animal hides and sticks. Your body aches from the cold ground, your stomach gnaws with hunger, and you already feel the weight of a problem that dominated every waking moment for our ancestors. Food. Without a steady food source, you wouldn't last long. For Stone Age people, survival was an endless battle between starvation and sustenance. Unlike us, they couldn't open a fridge, wander to a shop, or even rely on steady farming harvests. They lived in a world of uncertainty, one where every meal was the product of skill, cooperation, luck, and sometimes sheer desperation. So, let's step slowly into their morning ritual. Let's follow a tribe on the hunt. You'll quickly discover why. Unless you're unusually lucky, you probably wouldn't survive a day out there. The necessity of the hunt. When you think of Stone Age life, you might picture men charging at mammoths with spears, shouting bravely, while women stayed behind to cook berries and roots. That's the Hollywood version. In reality, hunting was far less glamorous and far more terrifying. First, Stone Age people weren't always chasing giant mammoths. They did, on rare occasions, but most of the time they focused on smaller, more practical prey. Deer, wild boar, reindeer, and sometimes rabbits or birds. Large hunts required enormous energy, coordination, and often ended in disaster. If you slipped up, you could be trampled, gored, or crushed. And here's the key. Failure meant starvation because there was no backup meal waiting at home. That's why many groups relied just as much, sometimes more, on foraging for plants, nuts, and roots. Yet even that wasn't easy. Many plants were poisonous, and the line between a nourishing tuber and a deadly one could be as thin as a bitter taste on your tongue. Without centuries of accumulated knowledge, you'd poison yourself before you knew it. The cold, hard prep work before a hunt. There was planning. You'd wake up to the sound of flint scraping as tribe members sharpened spear tips. Spears were your lifeline. No spear, no chance. But remember, these weren't the sleek steel weapons you imagine. These were wooden shafts tipped with stone points, painstakingly knapped from flint or obsidian. Each tip might take hours to craft and could shatter with one unlucky throw. If your tribe had mastered the atlatl, a throwing stick that acted like an extension of the arm, you might stand a chance at actually striking something from a safe distance. Without it, you'd have to get dangerously close. Imagine trying to stab a wild boar charging straight at you with nothing but a sharpened stick. Meanwhile, others in the tribe might prepare snares or pit traps, digging into frozen ground with crude tools. These were laborious, exhausting, and often unreliable. But if successful, they could catch smaller prey with less risk. Tracking, reading the silent world. Here's where your modern self would almost certainly fail. Tracking. To a Stone Age hunter, the world was alive with invisible signs. A bent blade of grass, a clump of fur stuck to bark, a fresh set of hoofprints in the mud. These were clues as loud as a neon sign. They could tell you not just what animal passed by, but when, how fast it was moving, whether it was alone or in a herd. You'd walk past all of it. You wouldn't notice that the faint scent on the wind meant a herd of deer was just beyond the ridge. You wouldn't spot the subtle difference between an old print and a new one. You'd probably step on the tracks, erase them, and doom the hunt before it even began. For Stone Age people, failure to read the land meant death. For you, ignorance would mean hunger. The hunt itself, brutal and desperate, let's say. By some miracle, the tribe has tracked a deer. Here's the scene. Men and women spread out silently, encircling the animal. There's no whispering, no crunch of careless footsteps. Every movement is calculated. Then a sudden rush. Spears fly, shouts echo. The deer bolts. Most of the time, the first throw misses. Hunting wasn't about one clean strike. It was about exhaustion. They would chase the animal, driving it into confusion and fatigue. Sometimes this meant running for miles, because humans were, believe it or not, built for endurance running. But for you, after 5 minutes of sprinting through uneven ground, lungs burning, legs shaking, you'd collapse. Stone Age hunters, trained since childhood, would press on, relentlessly. They could chase a deer until it literally dropped dead from exhaustion. You would be left behind, gasping, useless. The kill not what you expect. Even when the animal finally fell, the danger wasn't over. A cornered boar could slash open your leg with its tusks. A desperate deer could gore you, and if it was something larger, like an aurochs, the massive wild ancestor of cattle, you could be crushed beneath a single kick. Once the kill was made, there was no celebration yet. First, blood had to be drained, hide stripped, meat carefully cut. Every part was precious. Bones for tools, tendons for string, fat for fuel. Even the stomach could be cleaned and used as a water container. Nothing went to waste, because waste meant death later. And here's the part you'd probably find hardest: eating raw parts immediately. Fresh blood, liver, heart, these were often consumed on the spot, prized for their nutrients and warmth. To a Stone Age person, this was normal. To you, it would feel barbaric. But remember, cooking everything wasn't always possible. Fire wasn't guaranteed. Hunger didn't wait. Failure was common. What if the hunt failed? That was the usual outcome. Prey escaped more often than not, and failure meant trudging back to camp empty-handed, facing hungry children and exhausted elders. The shame, the despair, the pressure, it weighed heavily. For you, one failed attempt would probably break your will. For them, it was routine. They got up the next day and tried again because they had no other choice. Why you wouldn't survive? By now, you can probably see it. You wouldn't survive the hunt. You wouldn't notice the tracks. You wouldn't endure the chase. You wouldn't face the raw fear of stabbing an animal up close. And even if you somehow made the kill, you wouldn't have the stomach or the stomach acids to eat it in the way they did. For Stone Age people, hunting was not sport. It was survival, culture, and identity wrapped together. But for you, it would be overwhelming. That's why you wouldn't last a day. Imagine for a moment that you've survived the hunt. Your tribe managed to bring down a deer, or at least a hare or two. Your belly might be less empty than it was yesterday, but the real enemy is not hunger, it's the cold. Because the Stone Age wasn't kind, and depending on the era, you might have been living through ice ages where winters stretched endlessly. Without fire, without proper shelter, you would not last the night. But here's the truth that rarely gets mentioned in neat textbook summaries: fire wasn't always guaranteed. Yes, early humans had mastered it, but keeping it alive was a constant struggle. Starting a new fire from scratch could take hours of effort. Sparks struck from flint and pyrite, carefully caught on dry fungus or shredded bark. But what if it had rained the night before? What if snow had soaked every stick and leaf? Then your tribe's survival depended on someone having guarded the embers through the night, carrying a glowing coal in a hollowed-out bone or clay container, even while walking for miles. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was life itself. The bitter cold, picture it. You're huddled with your tribe inside a crude shelter, little more than animal skins stretched over wooden poles, or perhaps the curved rib bones of a mammoth half buried in snow. The wind howls outside, rattling the hide walls. Inside, smoke from the fire curls low, stinging your eyes because there's no chimney to carry it away. Your clothes are not thick woolen coats, nor down jackets. They're stitched hides, heavy and stiff when wet, often crawling with lice. The fur may keep some warmth, but if it gets damp, it's as if you're wearing a sponge. Without fire, the cold creeps in. It numbs fingers, turns breath to ice, and whispers death in every corner of the shelter. Infants and elders are the first to suffer. They grow still, quiet, and then simply stop breathing. The survivors know this rhythm too well. You cannot bury the dead when the ground is frozen solid, so you drag the body outside, leaving it to the wolves. This is the life you're trying to survive, not for weeks, not for months, but every single night. The struggle to keep warm in modern times: we light a match, flick a switch, or adjust a thermostat. But in the Stone Age, warmth came at a cost of constant effort. Gathering wood, trees did not always grow thick in glacial Europe. You might have to walk miles, chopping branches with stone axes, dragging logs back to camp, always hoping another tribe hasn't stripped the land bare already. Carrying fire. If the flames died, your people were forced to travel long distances to find another group willing to share embers. Imagine approaching strangers in the dark, who might greet you with a spear rather than generosity. The fire keepers. In many groups, 1 or 2 people were tasked with never letting the flames go out. They fed the fire through the night, fighting exhaustion, because if they failed, everyone might die by morning. But even with fire, survival was never comfortable. Huddled close, smoke filling your lungs, sparks burning tiny holes in the hides that covered you, you'd sit shivering, waiting for dawn. And still, your toes might blacken with frostbite, and you'd have to decide whether to keep walking on them until they fell off, or stop moving and die. The fragile shelter. Let's talk about your house. If you were lucky, you lived near caves, natural shelters carved into cliffs where fires could burn with some protection from the wind. But caves were rare and not always safe. Bears or cave lions might already be living there. The alternative was what archaeologists call mammoth bone huts or hide tents. These weren't cozy cabins, they were desperate constructions, holes of wood or bone jammed into the ground, lashed together with sinew, then draped with animal skins. Snow might be piled against the outside to block drafts. Inside it was cramped, smoky, and crowded with coughing children and anxious adults. Disease thrived here too. Lice, fleas, and skin infections were constant companions. A single sneeze could ripple through the entire tribe, leaving the weak gasping in their sleep, and then there were accidents. Fires in such fragile shelters could spread fast. Imagine a spark catching the edge of a fir wall. In moments, your only protection from the ice becomes a bonfire, and you're forced back into the freezing dark. Life around the fire yet. Despite all this, fire was also the center of Stone Age culture. It wasn't just for warmth. It cooked meat, softened roots, and made some plants edible that would otherwise poison you. It hardened wooden spear tips, kept predators at bay, and offered light in the dark. Around the fire, people told stories, painted on cave walls, and sang in voices that cracked with hunger but carried hope. It was fire that turned survival into something more than just endurance. It gave meaning, rhythm, and a sense of belonging. But don't let that romantic image fool you. Behind the dancing flames, shadows flickered with fear. Every cough was a reminder of weakness, every snapping branch outside a warning of wolves. If the flames died, hope died with them. Why you wouldn't survive? Now place yourself in this picture. Could you manage it? Could you gather enough wood with only stone tools? Could you guard a fragile flame through endless icy nights? Could you sit in the smoke, the lice, the hunger, and still have the strength to get up in the morning and do it all again? This is why the Stone Age would break you. Not because people didn't know what they were doing, they were experts at survival, but because modern comforts have left us fragile. One night in those conditions, with the fire gone out, and the cold seeping in, and most of us would never wake up. Imagine you finally found food after days of hunger in the Stone Age. Maybe it's a deer, hunted with sheer patience, or a rabbit snared after hours of waiting in the freezing cold. You'd think survival meant filling your belly right away, but here's the real problem. What about tomorrow? What about next week, when the snow still covers the ground, when the rivers freeze, and when no berries or fresh meat can be found? In the Stone Age, finding food was only half the battle, keeping it edible was another. Today we wrap our leftovers in plastic wrap, pop them in the fridge, or toss them in the freezer. In the Stone Age, there were none of these luxuries. Your ancestors had to rely on primitive food preservation techniques, and if they failed, an entire group could starve. The art of preservation. The most obvious method was to simply eat as much as possible while it was fresh. But no human can consume an entire mammoth in one sitting, not even the hungriest tribe. So people turned to preservation by smoke, drying and freezing. Drying meat was perhaps the most universal method. Strips of animal flesh would be cut thin and left out to dry in the cold, dry air or near the heat of a fire. The fat was scraped away, since fat spoiled more quickly, leaving lean flesh that could last for weeks. The resulting product was tough, leathery, and required constant chewing to soften, but it was life-saving. Smoking, meanwhile, gave food extra flavor while keeping bacteria at bay. Imagine a dark hut, filled with smoke, meat hanging from poles overhead, its juices dripping slowly onto the flames. The smoke saturated every fiber of the flesh, giving it a sharp, almost bitter taste. If you were a Stone Age traveler, you would have eaten this with gratitude, no matter how tough or acrid. And then there was the greatest refrigerator of all, the Ice Age itself. Food could be buried under snow, or placed in pits dug into the frozen earth, keeping it fresh for far longer than the warm months would allow. But this method had risks. Hungry wolves or other scavengers often sniffed out the hidden caches, undoing weeks of hard work in a single night. Tools, not just rocks. Most people imagine the Stone Age as endless clubs and clunky rock axes. But survival demanded far more sophistication. The tools you would have relied on were diverse, carefully crafted, and astonishingly effective if you knew how to make and use them. Stone knives, carved from flint, were sharper than many modern blades, though fragile. They could slice through animal hide or gutfish with precision. Spears tipped with bone or stone were not only weapons but tools for fishing, hunting, and even digging. There were scrapers for cleaning hides, used to prepare clothing and shelter coverings. Without them, animal skins would rot quickly, leaving you exposed to the elements. Needles carved from bone allowed people to stitch hides together into wearable clothing, something that often marked the difference between life and death in harsh winters. The making of tools wasn't simply a matter of bashing rocks together. It was a skill passed down through generations, requiring patience and finesse. A poorly crafted tool could mean wasted effort, failed hunts, or even injury. If you were suddenly dropped into the Stone Age, you wouldn't just be cold and hungry, you'd also be clumsy, unable to reproduce the finely tuned craftsmanship your ancestors mastered through lifelong practice. The hidden hierarchies. Now here's something rarely discussed. The Stone Age wasn't a free-for-all where everyone hunted and gathered equally. Roles within tribes were crucial. The strongest men often hunted large game, but this was dangerous and inconsistent. Women and elders gathered plants, trapped small animals, and processed hides and meat. Children learned by watching and helping, often scaring birds toward nets or collecting firewood. In times of scarcity, women's gathering often provided more reliable calories than men's risky hunts. Roots, berries, nuts and grains gathered by hand often fed a tribe more consistently than the occasional deer. Without this balance, entire groups would have collapsed. It's worth remembering that survival wasn't just about physical strength. Knowledge was power. An elder who remembered where certain plants grew, which berries were poisonous, or how to prepare a hide properly, was often more valuable than a strong hunter who could swing a spear. In fact, many Stone Age communities had leaders who were not the strongest but the wisest storytellers, healers, or memory keepers whose knowledge preserved life across generations. The price of failure. Of course, if food preservation failed, tools broke, or community structures collapsed, the price was brutal. Starvation wasn't a slow inconvenience, it was a merciless death sentence. Imagine eating strips of dried, smoky meat that were already beginning to rot, your stomach twisting as you forced it down. Imagine a fire that smolders too low, failing to keep the drying racks hot enough, leaving food moldy and useless. Or picture a winter when caches of frozen meat were discovered by wolves. One night, a tribe might wake to find their stores ripped open, their survival stolen by hungry predators. This was life in the Stone Age. Every preserved bite of food represented planning, effort, and luck. And when preservation failed, there were no second chances. Why you wouldn't survive. If you're still imagining yourself tough enough to last a day in the Stone Age, pause here. Ask yourself, could you skin a deer and dry its meat without modern tools? Could you sew hides into boots and coats with nothing but a bone needle and sinew thread? Could you ration food, keeping it hidden from predators, and survive weeks of hunger when the snow covered the earth? Chances are, you'd be lost, not because you're weak, but because the Stone Age demanded skills you were never taught. Your ancestors didn't just survive by luck, they endured because they knew the value of preservation, craftsmanship, and community. Without these, even the strongest hunter was doomed. So while you might admire a spear, or think you could roast a rabbit over a fire, the reality is simple. In the Stone Age, your survival depended less on what you could kill in a single day, and more on how you prepared for all the days that followed. Imagine again that you are living in the Stone Age. You've survived the hunger of winter, the howling wolves at the edge of camp, the freezing winds, and the exhausting daily grind of gathering and preserving food. But now, you face a quieter, more insidious danger: sickness. Unlike the cold, which strikes you immediately, or hunger, which gnaws at you with steady persistence, disease in the Stone Age often crept in unseen. You might not even know you are sick until it is far too late, and once it has you, your chances of recovery are slim. Let's take a slow walk through this hidden world, the world of Stone Age illness, injuries, and the desperate attempts people made to heal themselves. The fragile body in a harsh world. Start with the basics. The human body in the Stone Age was constantly battered. Just walking barefoot on frozen, uneven ground tore calluses and cracked skin. A cut from a flint blade could quickly fester into something life-threatening. Even something as simple as a toothache could spiral into agony, swelling, fever, and eventually death. In a world without antibiotics, soap, or even the concept of germs, every wound was a gamble. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons often find evidence of broken bones that never healed properly, infected jawlines from untreated dental abscesses, and signs of arthritis developing in people as young as their 20s. Imagine sitting by the fire, clutching a swollen jaw as your face throbs with infection. There is no relief, no dentist, no medicine. Perhaps someone in your tribe might suggest chewing bitter willow bark, the natural source of what we now call aspirin, but it would dull the pain only a little. For many, the infection spread deeper until their bones themselves carried the scars. The invisible enemy, disease. While much of the Stone Age predates the major epidemics that would later ravage densely packed civilizations, disease was still a constant threat. Think about parasites. Without clean water, intestinal worms thrived. Tiny eggs clung to unwashed hands, to undercooked meat, to stagnant pools of water. Once inside, they sapped your strength, bloated your belly, and left you weak. Respiratory infections were another silent killer. Caves and huts filled with smoke from fires, poorly ventilated and crowded, became breeding grounds for coughs that turned into pneumonia. For a child or elder, a bad winter cough could mean the end. Archaeological remains also suggest cases of tuberculosis, leprosy, and other long-lasting diseases, even in early prehistory. People carried them not just as individuals but as communities. Once an infection took root, it traveled with the tribe. Broken bones and crude fixes. Of course, accidents were everywhere. Hunting meant charging at wild animals, with nothing more than sharpened sticks and stone points. One misstep, and you could be gored by an aurochs, trampled by a deer, or crushed beneath a falling tree. And what then? If you broke a leg, your chances of survival depended entirely on the compassion and ingenuity of your community. Evidence shows that some Stone Age groups attempted to set broken bones. Splints made of wood, bark, or bone fragments have been discovered alongside remains with healed fractures. But healed does not always mean functional. Many people lived with crooked limbs or permanent disability after a break. A broken leg in winter could mean doom for you, and a burden for your tribe. Some were cared for. Evidence suggests strong social bonds. Others may have been left behind if survival of the group was at stake. Primitive healing and herbal remedies. Despite the danger, people were not helpless. Early humans experimented endlessly with plants. Bitter roots, leaves, and barks were chewed to ease fevers or rubbed on wounds to fight swelling. Some plants had genuine medicinal properties: willow bark, yarrow, or garlic, while others were poisonous and could just as easily worsen your suffering. Shamans or spiritual healers likely played a role, combining herbal remedies with ritual. They might paint your body with ochre, chant over you, or burn herbs to chase away evil spirits, believed to cause the sickness. The line between medicine and magic was thin, and to them inseparable. Trepanation, the practice of drilling a hole into the skull, appears in Stone Age remains across Europe and beyond. Astonishingly, many patients survived the procedure, their skulls showing signs of healing. Perhaps it was an attempt to cure headaches, seizures, or spirits trapped in the body. To us, it seems shocking. To them, it was one more way to fight invisible forces. Death in the Stone Age. The harsh truth is this: many people did not survive into what we would call middle age. Child mortality was brutal. 1 in 3, or even 1 in 2 children might not live past their 5th year. Mothers died often in childbirth, and for those who lived, disease hovered like a shadow, waiting to strike when the body was weakest. Sitting around the fire, you would have seen friends and family die from what we consider small problems today: an untreated cut, a cough that turned deadly, a fever that never broke. But within this darkness, there is also resilience. Stone Age communities carried one another, cared for the sick, and learned slowly what plants and rituals could offer relief. Survival was fragile, yes, but it was not hopeless. Why you wouldn't survive for you, a modern person? The Stone Age's world of illness and crude healing would be unbearable. You're used to antibiotics, painkillers, sterile surgery, and warm hospitals. In the Stone Age, none of that existed. Even a paper-cut-sized wound could kill you. Even the common cold could end your days. This is why, even if you managed to endure hunger, cold, and predators, disease would almost certainly claim you. You would not last long. Imagine yourself seated in the heart of a smoky cave, the fire's glow pulsing like a living heart. Outside, snow and silence stretch endlessly, but in here, shadows flicker across stone walls alive with ancient paintings. Deer, bison, hunters in motion. These weren't decorations. They were promises, prayers, and desperate attempts to bend the will of the world. The Stone Age wasn't only about spears, hides, and hunger. It was also about belief. Belief that survival wasn't merely physical, but also spiritual. When your child lay coughing in the night, when the hunt failed, when winter closed in too soon, you needed answers. And so the mind created them. Spirits, ancestors, powers hidden in rivers, mountains, and firelight. The weight of invisible forces. Stone Age humans didn't divide the world into natural and supernatural the way we often do. Everything was alive. The river had a voice, the wind had moods, fire itself could be tamed but never fully trusted. It gave warmth, but could burn, vanish, or refuse to spark when you needed it most. If we were to live a single day in their shoes, we'd quickly discover how much of daily survival was wrapped up in these invisible forces. When the hunt was successful, it wasn't just luck or skill, it was the spirit of the animal allowing itself to be caught. When a sudden illness struck, it wasn't just infection, it was punishment, a spirit offended, or an ancestor neglected. This worldview shaped every action. Before you ate, you might whisper a thanks. Before you hunted, you might smear ochre across your body or tie feathers in your hair. To do otherwise was to risk not just failure, but death. Rituals of protection. Picture a Stone Age family preparing to leave the cave for a winter hunt. They don't just grab spears and go. Instead, a ritual begins. The shaman or elder, often someone with knowledge of herbs, dreams, and symbols, sprinkles powdered ochre into the fire. The sparks rise like tiny spirits flying upward. Hunters press handprints against the cave wall, marking not just presence but a sort of magical contract. I was here. Remember me. Protect me. Animal bones are burned in the fire, their smoke believed to carry messages to the spirits of the hunt. These rituals weren't empty gestures, they were psychological armor. Facing a charging aurochs or stalking a deer through frozen woods was terrifying, but with ritual, you felt shielded, chosen, guided. For you, stepping into that hunt without ritual would feel like leaving the house without clothes. It was unthinkable. Shamans. Between worlds, every community had figures who straddled the line between the physical and the spiritual. These weren't kings or priests as we think of them, but shamans, medicine people, dream interpreters, keepers of songs and visions. Their role was survival. If a child was sick, the shaman chanted, burned herbs, and sometimes even cut or scraped the body to let the evil out. If the tribe was starving, the shaman might fast, wander alone into the snow, or inhale smoke until visions came, visions that told where game might be found. Imagine the pressure on this person, your entire tribe, hungry and scared, staring at you to pull answers out of the unseen. You close your eyes, the smoke stings, the fire cracks. What if nothing comes? What if your trance fails? For us, it would be exhausting. For them, it was a calling, and sometimes, the only thread holding the group together. The power of cave paintings. We often look at Stone Age cave paintings and admire them as art. But to the people who painted them, they were much more ritual tools. Take the great halls of Lascaux or Chauvet. In the flickering firelight, the painted animals seemed to move, leap, charge. This was more than beauty. It was magic. By painting the animal, you captured its spirit. By stabbing the painted bison with a spear, in practice, you weakened the real thing. Some scholars even suggest that caves themselves were sacred spaces, womb-like chambers where humans entered to be reborn, to connect with forces beyond ordinary life. Picture yourself crawling deep into a cave, torch in hand, the air damp and echoing. You kneel before a wall, mix ochre with fat, and paint a red deer. The firelight makes its legs twitch. You feel the presence of the animal, of ancestors, of something watching. The ritual is complete. You have asked, and now you hope the world listens. Death and the afterlife. One of the clearest signs of Stone Age belief lies in burials. People weren't simply left where they died. They were placed carefully, bodies curled in fetal positions, as if returning to the womb. Red ochre sprinkled across bones, symbolizing blood, life, rebirth. Grave goods, tools, beads, sometimes even animal parts, laid beside the dead, suggesting they would need them in another world. Imagine your neighbor dies. You help dig a shallow pit in frozen ground. The body is wrapped in furs, red powder is scattered, shining like dried blood. Someone places a flint knife in the grave, because even in death, one must hunt. For us, this would feel unsettling. For them it was necessary. To fail to bury someone properly was to risk angering their spirit. Fear of spirits. Not all spirits were kind. The Stone Age mind was filled with dangers we can scarcely imagine. Spirits of the unburied dead, who lingered and brought sickness. Spirits of animals killed without respect, who could turn the hunt against you. Spirits in storms, rivers and caves, who punished arrogance. To live without belief in these dangers would be impossible. You wouldn't dare drink from a river without whispering first. You wouldn't dare step into the dark woods without a talisman. Why? You wouldn't survive. You, as a modern person, would stumble badly in this world. You'd scoff at rituals, refuse to smear yourself with ochre, and perhaps mock the idea that a bone charm could protect you. To the tribe, that arrogance alone could doom the group. And even if you tried to fake it, you'd lack the deep-seated conviction that made ritual effective. Fear would gnaw at you. Every cough, every misstep in the snow, every failure in the hunt would feel like punishment. Without belief, you would not only be spiritually unprotected, you'd also lose the psychological edge that kept hunters brave and mothers hopeful. In the Stone Age, belief wasn't optional, it was survival. Imagine it. The sun has dipped below the jagged horizon, leaving behind only a bruised streak of purple and fading gold. The chill begins almost instantly. The Stone Age landscape, open plains, scattered trees, and distant mountains, is silent, except for the crunch of frost underfoot and the distant howl of wolves already circling in the dark. By day, survival was a battle of hunger, gathering roots, chasing game, and keeping your tribe moving. But by night, the true test arrived. Cold killed more efficiently than hunger, predators, or wounds. You could go days without food, but only hours without warmth. And in the Stone Age, warmth meant one thing: fire. Fire, as the thin line between life and death. Fire wasn't just heat, it was a miracle. To a Stone Age person, fire was a god, a shield and a weapon all in one. A glowing hearth meant survival, a dead fire meant death by dawn. The flames offered warmth against bone-cracking frost, light to hold back predators with glowing eyes, protection from insects, snakes, and scavengers, hope, a symbol that tomorrow might come. But fire was fragile. A single gust of wind, an untended flame, wet wood, or careless hands could kill it. And without flint, dry tinder, or knowledge of friction fire techniques, restarting it in the freezing dark was nearly impossible. You wouldn't survive this night, because one mistake meant the end. And in the Stone Age, nights were long. The ritual of guarding the flame tribes treated fire like a sacred child. Someone always kept watch. The firekeeper's duty wasn't optional, it was life. Picture a group huddled inside a cave or under crude shelters of hide and bone. In the center, a small fire flickers, smoke curling toward cracks in the ceiling. Each hour someone feeds it, a stick here, a log there, dry moss for kindling. Children might fetch twigs, elders whisper prayers, and hunters return with bark and fat to make the flames stronger. Fire wasn't just survival, it was community. It required cooperation. Now imagine you, dropped into this world. You don't know which wood burns long, which grass sparks fastest, or how to keep embers glowing under ash until morning. You'd likely smother the flame out of ignorance, or fall asleep when it needed tending most. And once it died, so would you. Cold as an enemy. Stone Age cold wasn't like the chilly morning when you forget your jacket. This was death in the air. Frostbite gnawed at fingers and toes first, blackening flesh. Hypothermia crept in silently, making people shiver, then mumble, then collapse. Joints stiffened, lungs burned, breath froze in the night air. Rude the flame. The worst part? You wouldn't even realize you were dying. In freezing temperatures, your body convinces you to lie down, to just rest. Many never woke again. Stone Age people wrapped themselves in fur hides, slept in piles for shared warmth, and pressed close to embers. Without those strategies, and without the willpower to endure hours of teeth-chattering misery, you wouldn't last until dawn. Predators in the shadows, as if the cold wasn't enough. Predators prowled the darkness. Wolves, cave lions, and even bears knew that humans gathered around fire, and often they waited for mistakes. Without fire, your camp wasn't just cold, it was bait. The smell of roasted meat or dried hides drew scavengers from miles away. A circle of flame kept them cautious, but the second it faltered, shadows grew bold. Imagine seeing glowing eyes at the edge of firelight and realizing the flame is shrinking. Would you know how to throw burning brands, shout in unison, and scare predators away? Stone Age people did. You, fresh from modern comforts, likely would not. The burden of carrying fire. Here's something most people never think about. Stone Age tribes couldn't always rely to fire from scratch. Flint wasn't always available. The bow drill was tricky and exhausting. Dry tinder wasn't guaranteed in a damp winter. So what did they do? They carried fire with them. Picture it, a young girl trudging through snow, clutching a smoldering branch wrapped in bark, shielding it from the wind with her body. The tribe moved, but the flame had to move with them. If it went out, the tribe was as good as dead. Could you carry a burning ember for miles without letting it die? Could you keep it glowing in rain, snow, or storms? Stone Age survival wasn't just about fire, it was about carrying the very heart of life itself. Psychological terror of the night. Let's not forget the mental battle. You're sitting in a cave, the fire crackling, shadows dancing across rough stone walls. Every pop of the flame sounds like approaching footsteps. Every howl feels closer. You don't sleep, not fully. You doze in half dreams, clutching a stone knife, praying the fire holds. Stone Age people lived with this constant dread. They didn't just fear the cold, they feared the darkness itself. For to lose fire was to be swallowed by an uncaring night. And you, used to heated rooms, electric lights and thick blankets, would crumble under the terror of silence, broken only by distant growls and the crack of ice shifting outside. What fire meant beyond survival. And here's the thing, fire wasn't just about living through the night. It was about becoming human. Fire shaped culture. It meant cooked food, stronger bodies, new tools, and new stories told around flickering light. To keep fire alive was to keep humanity alive. That's why you wouldn't last. you wouldn't just fail to survive, you'd fail to carry the most sacred inheritance of our species. In one Stone Age night, your fate would be sealed, not by wolves, not by hunger, not even by the cold, but by a simple truth: you never learned to guar. Each night had been bitter, the fire barely clinging to life, but morning brought no relief. In fact, the daylight revealed something even more terrifying than wolves' eyes or frozen winds. Emptiness. The ground was bare, the traps held no animals, and the foragers' baskets returned empty. In the Stone Age, hunger wasn't an inconvenience. It was the shadow always lurking just behind you, waiting for the moment your fire sputtered or your hunt failed. Imagine waking to the gnawing ache of an empty stomach. Not just once, but for days. No steaming porridge, no fresh bread, not even the illusion of stored food. If your band had failed to bring down game, or if berries had already been stripped from the frozen bushes, then there was nothing. The elders would look into the distance, hollow-eyed, knowing exactly what was coming: starvation. Why starvation was a daily threat? Hunting in the Stone Age was unpredictable. A successful hunt could mean enough meat to last several days, dried and smoked if weather permitted. But one failed hunt, that meant children crying, elders weakening, and adults facing the grim truth: they would have to risk everything for food. And here's the cruelest twist: sometimes the very environment that killed you with cold also hid your best chance of survival. Herds of reindeer, mammoth, or bison might migrate miles away, unreachable through knee-deep snow. Traps froze shut, fish under ice became inaccessible, and edible plants shriveled beneath frost. Every day meant burning more energy to hunt, forage, and walk through snowdrifts while consuming less and less food. You wouldn't survive a day in this cycle, even if you pushed yourself to keep going. The Stone Age body began to devour itself when hunger stretched longer than a few days. Fat burned first, then muscle, leaving people weaker just when strength was needed most. The psychological toll of hunger, it wasn't just physical, it was mental. Starvation gnawed at the mind. Elders told stories of warriors hallucinating in the snow, convinced they saw food in the distance. Others became irritable, fighting over scraps or accusing one another of laziness. Parents sometimes had to choose which child would eat more, or whether to save food for a stronger hunter rather than an elder. Archaeological evidence shows signs of cannibalism in desperate times. Bones split open for marrow, human remains burned alongside animal ones. Hunger didn't just kill, it broke taboos and forced impossible choices. Imagine your own family, gathered in silence, deciding if they could cross that final line. This was survival, stripped of every illusion of comfort. Survival foods you wouldn't stomach when real food was gone. Stone Age tribes turned to things you would never dare put in your mouth. Tree bark. Inner bark from pines and birches could be chewed for minimal calories, though it tasted bitter and caused stomach cramps. Roots and tubers, dug from frozen soil, often poisonous if not boiled long enough. Bones and hides, scraped clean, boiled for hours to create weak broth. Sometimes hides were chewed until softened enough to swallow. Insects, beetle grubs, ants, even frozen grasshoppers provided protein, but only the desperate stomach accepted them. If you turned your nose up at a bug on your plate, you wouldn't last a single starving winter. Stone Age survivors learned to swallow disgust because hunger left no choice. The elders and the weak left behind hunger also revealed brutal realities about human survival. When a band had too little food, someone was left behind. Often it was the elderly, who whispered farewells and accepted their fate with stoicism. In some Arctic cultures echoing ancient practices, elders voluntarily walked into the snow so that the younger and stronger might live. Mothers sometimes faced the impossible: should they feed themselves enough to keep hunting, or give food to children too young to survive alone? These choices fractured the soul. You think you could handle hunger, you might last a day, perhaps two. But what about watching someone you love fade away, just because the world was cruel enough to hide food beneath endless snow? The constant shadow of starvation. Starvation wasn't a rare event. It hovered like a ghost over every Stone Age family. One bad hunt, one unexpected storm, one broken spear, and the entire group teetered on the edge of famine. When you picture prehistoric people, don't imagine constant feasting on mammoth roasts and endless berries. Picture gaunt faces, shrunken bellies, children crying themselves to sleep, and adults forcing down bitter roots that barely kept them alive. Survival wasn't just about fighting predators, it was about fighting the emptiness within. That's why you wouldn't survive a day in the Stone Age. Hunger was always waiting, and if you think you're strong enough to last, try skipping your next 3 meals. Then imagine walking 20 miles through snow, spear in hand, with nothing but the sound of your stomach echoing in your ears. Imagine yourself at the heart of a Stone Age camp. The snow outside presses in from every direction. Wolves howl in the distance. Food is scarce and night feels eternal. Yet here, in the middle of the tribe, crackling firelight pushes back the darkness. It is warmth, safety, and comfort. But to the Stone Age mind, fire is not simply warmth, it is sacred. The people who lived tens of thousands of years ago did not separate the spiritual from the practical. Fire was survival, yes, but it was also a living presence, a mysterious force that arrived from lightning or erupted from wood when struck by stone. To them, it was not a tool but a spirit, and to control it was to speak with something beyond the human world. Rituals of flame. When hunters returned successful, it was fire that roasted the meat. When sickness struck, fire purified smoke-filled huts. And when death came, as it often did, fire was the boundary between the living and the dead. Archaeologists have discovered that in many early camps, fires were deliberately kept burning for days, even weeks, without being allowed to die. It was as though the flame itself guarded the tribe, a companion that could not be abandoned. Children grew up with stories that the fire was a spirit, watching them, punishing neglect. To let it go out was not simply lazy, it was dangerous. Some tribes may have danced around flames, painting their faces with ochre and ash, chanting rhythms to honor it. Others may have whispered prayers into the smoke, asking it to carry their words upward to gods or ancestors. You would not survive here without learning to respect fire. It was not only warmth, it was a constant negotiation with the unseen, the ever-present fear of death. But survival was not guaranteed. In the Stone Age, death walked hand in hand with daily life. A small cut could fester into a fatal infection. A broken leg could end not just a hunt, but a life. Childbirth was as dangerous as battle. Starvation and freezing were constant companions, and so rituals developed. To you they might look strange songs, frantic dances, offerings of food or tools placed beside the dead. But to them they were essential acts of protection. Without ritual the tribe felt exposed. Without prayer the unseen forces of the world might turn hostile. Death rituals were as much about the living as the dead. By burying a hunter with his spear, the tribe not only honored him but hoped his spirit would not haunt them. By wrapping a child in fur and laying beads on their body, they comforted themselves that the child was not lost but traveling somewhere else. The Stone Age world was not silent. It was full of whispers, and the people did not dare ignore them. Burial and the origins of belief. Archaeological discoveries have shown us graves that date back tens of thousands of years. Red ochre, powdered iron oxide, was sprinkled on bodies, turning them a deep blood red, as though restoring the life they had lost. Shells, beads, and carved figures were buried alongside them. Some graves even contained entire meals left for the dead. Imagine being in a world so harsh that every scrap of food mattered, yet still setting aside meat or berries to feed someone who had already passed on. That is not wastefulness. It is fear, respect, and hope intertwined. You wouldn't survive this world without participating in these acts. If you refused to join the burial rituals, to touch ochre, to lay offerings, the tribe might turn on you. Not because they disliked you, but because your neglect risked angering forces they believed controlled everything. In the Stone Age, survival wasn't just about food and water. It was about belief and whether your tribe thought you were protecting them or putting them at risk. Shamans, guides between worlds. Out of this atmosphere of fear and reverence rose the first spiritual leaders, shamans. These were not rulers in the political sense, but guides, individuals who seemed able to cross between the human world and the spirit realm. A shaman might wear animal skins, antlers or feathers, transforming themselves into something half human, half beast. In flickering firelight, they would chant, drum, and sway until their voice cracked, their body convulsed, and their tribe believed they had stepped into another world. To you, this might seem like madness or theater, but to the Stone Age mind, it was survival. The shaman could heal the sick, call the animals to the hunt, or drive away hostile spirits. If you angered a shaman, you didn't just anger a person, you risked losing the favor of the unseen. Imagine being surrounded by chanting voices, the air thick with smoke, as a figure painted in ochre and ash trembles before you, calling down forces you cannot see. You would be expected to join in, to clap, to howl, to believe. If you laughed, if you doubted, if you stood apart, you might not survive the tribe's suspicion. Fear as a survival tool. Fear was not weakness, it was guidance. Fear told them not to wander too far alone. Fear told them to honor the dead. Fear told them to treat fire as sacred. This is why myths emerged. A story about a spirit in the forest was not just a tale, it was a warning to stay close to camp. A belief in ghosts was not childish. It was a way to ensure people honored the dead properly. Rituals were not superstitions, they were survival strategies, wrapped in belief. For you, transported into this world, the rituals might feel stifling, even frightening, but without them, you would have no place in the tribe. You would be unprotected. You would not last a day. The emotional landscape. It's easy to think of the Stone Age as only physical hardship, cold, hunger, predators, but the emotional landscape was just as brutal. Imagine the constant grief of high child mortality, the endless uncertainty of the hunt, the gnawing fear that winter would never end. Rituals softened these pains. Believing that ancestors watched over them gave comfort. Believing that a shaman's chant could heal gave hope. Believing that the fire was a spirit made the cold a little less terrifying. You would not survive this world if you carried only skepticism. You needed belief as much as food. It was belief that gave meaning to suffering. Closing, reflection, fire, faith, fear. These were not separate ideas in the Stone Age, they were one. Fire was life, but it was also the voice of spirits. Faith was trust, but it was also ritual. Fear was dread, but it was also guidance. You wouldn't last a day here if you ignored these things. For the Stone Age was not only about survival of the body, it was about survival of the soul, and the soul was fragile in a world full of shadows. Imagine for a moment that the fire before you has burned low. The smoke curls lazily into the dark, carrying with it the smell of pine resin and charred bone. The tribe, your tribe, sits quietly, not speaking, only breathing in unison. Outside the circle of light, the vast world stretches on forests filled with predators, icy rivers swollen with meltwater, skies that shift with endless cycles of hunger and renewal. You are alive, but you know life is a fragile thread, one that could snap with a broken bone, a failed hunt, or a winter that lingers too long. This was the heartbeat of the Stone Age. And now, as we close our journey into this ancient chapter, it's time to look not only at how they survived, but at what their story still whispers to us today. The fragility of a day. We began this story asking a simple question: why wouldn't you survive a day in the Stone Age? And the truth is, because every single day was a gamble. Food was never guaranteed. Water wasn't always safe. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was the line between life and death. Imagine you wake up in your fur bedding, your stomach gnawing with hunger. You step outside, only to realize the snow has fallen deeper than you expected. Hunting will be harder. The roots you foraged yesterday are already gone. Your survival today depends not on planning for the future, but on sheer luck. Every day was a roll of the dice, and for most, the dice weren't kind. Modern humans, cushioned by supermarkets, heaters and medicine, would last barely hours before panic set in. The Stone Age was not just about enduring hardship, it was about normalizing it. Hunger was not an exception, it was the rhythm of life. Illness was not feared in the same way, because it was constant, and death, rather than being an unwelcome intruder, was an everyday companion. Tools, the extension of the human hand. One of the greatest lessons of the Stone Age is the tool. Every stone flake, every bone awl, every sharpened spear was not just an object, it was an extension of the human body. Tools allowed fragile, slow, clawless humans to stand among predators. They gave us reach, strength, and defense, but they were also fragile. A broken spear in the snow could mean the difference between meat on the fire and starvation. Think of your own day. You might drop your phone, break it, and be frustrated. In the Stone Age, a broken stone knife was a true disaster, one that could unravel the survival of your family. This is why every chipped flint, every carved groove, carried not just utility, but ritual significance. Tools were power, tools were survival, and tools were sacred. Community, the web of dependence. We often imagine the Stone Age human as solitary, a lone hunter with a spear. But the truth is far different. Survival was communal. One person hunted, another cooked, another watched the children, another sang to keep spirits alive. Every role was necessary, every hand mattered. If you collapsed from hunger, the group might carry you. If you broke a bone, others tended the fire until you could walk again. The Stone Age tribe was the first human safety net, a network not of laws or contracts, but of shared survival. And here lies a sharp reminder for us today: humans have always lived through connection, never through isolation. Belief, making sense of chaos. The Stone Age was not only physical survival, it was also spiritual survival. Life was too unpredictable, too cruel to face without explanation. Why did the child die? Why did the mammoth not return? Why did the river flood? Without answers there was only despair. So belief filled the silence. Spirits were everywhere, in the trees, in the animals, in the fire, in the bones of the dead. The shaman became the bridge between chaos and meaning, spinning stories that turned suffering into ritual. Death was softened by ochre burials. Hunger was given purpose through myth. And fire, always fire, was a god itself. When you live with so little certainty, belief is not luxury, it is oxygen. Lessons for the modern world. What, then, can the Stone Age teach us? That survival is not about comfort. It is about resilience. It is about facing the cold morning when your stomach is empty and walking into the forest anyway. It is about holding each other close. About lighting a fire against the darkness even when the snow keeps falling. Today we live in a world that has tamed hunger and softened the cold, but beneath the fluorescent lights and digital screens, the Stone Age still echoes in our bones. We still gather in circles around tables, around televisions, around campfires. We still need community, still crave meaning, still look for stories that help us endure the unknown. We are not so different, only cushioned by time. And maybe that's the final truth. If you were dropped into the Stone Age, you probably wouldn't last a day. But the people of the Stone Age, if dropped into our world, would still survive. They would adapt. They always did. That is why you are here. A closing reflection. The Stone Age was not a story of endless suffering. It was a story of human endurance. A story of cleverness, courage, and the relentless will to keep the fire alive. You would not survive a day in their world, but they gave you the world you now survive in. Every ancestor who lit a flame, who sharpened a flint, who buried their dead with ochre, was part of an unbroken chain that leads to you. So the next time you step into the cold, or sit around a fire, remember them. Remember that your survival is not just yours, it is a gift handed down through blood, bone and ash. And that is the true legacy of the Stone Age. Gentle outro CTA. If you've made it this far, you've sat by the fire with me until the very end. Thank you. If you'd like to wander deeper into history, you can subscribe for more stories like this, strange, difficult and unforgettable. And before you go, let me know in the comments, would you have kept the fire alive?